Welcome, Third Rock listeners, to the Branding Laboratory. I'm your host, Deevo, Chief Experience Officer for the brand Storyteller and the Fusion Creative Brands. And each week, I have the privilege of speaking with extraordinary leaders and entrepreneurs who are reshaping the way industries work. These conversations go way beyond the surface to explore the core philosophies, the lessons, and the challenges that define the brands that we admire today. And one of the greatest rewards of this podcast is the opportunity to share the insights of some of the brightest minds in business, people who are passionate about pushing boundaries and redefining what's possible. And as I always say, the stories we tell are the brands we build. And this show is a testament to the power of that concept. Let's dive in. So you've heard us talking in the green room, if you will, but today I'm joined by Mitchell Levy. He is a global credibility expert. And those were all in caps, so I need to understand what that means. You are 2 times TEDx speaker. That's pretty cool. I'd like to chat with you about that because I have a lot of people telling me I need to do that, but I just don't really know what I would talk about just yet. You are an author of over 60 books. What the hell? Have you learned how to have you learned how to clone yourself? We need to talk about that. Yes. And you've published so you've written 60 and you've helped publish 750 books. You have an incredible resume of the type of people you work with, from thought leadership to CEOs to Silicon Valley. And what I'm gathering from reading about you and doing some recon, you help people unlock the secrets to credibility and transformation, personal transformation. Is that sort of some of the gaming? So anyhow, welcome to the Branding Laboratory. We tried to do this a few weeks ago, and the universe had different plans, but here we are. So I'm glad we finally reconnected. So thank you.
I'm really glad we did as well. Thanks.
So the authoring piece, I want to go back to that introduction. 60 books, and they're all centered around excellence, credibility, coaching, or did you do something before that?
My first book was, I'm one of those guys that I see something in the world, and if it doesn't feel quite right, I've got to research it. Way back when, I was debating whether or not I'd buy a house. And the entire industry and entire infrastructure, everyone says, you got to buy. Now, by the way, I bought in Silicon Valley and it was a good decision. That said, the price point was so high at the time. And I didn't want to just go because. So I spent a lot of time researching. I created a spreadsheet. I did some analysis, and then I ended up writing a book called Home Ownership: The American Myth. The simple answer was, if you're going to buy in a place where real estate's going up and you can't save if you're renting, you absolutely should buy. But there are some places where real estate doesn't go up, where it doesn't make sense. And for some people who would rather not be tied to a house and they could rent and save, it'd be better off. So I was just presenting a pragmatic view. One of the best things that happened is one of the top syndicated real estate experts saw my book and just trashed it in over 500 newspapers, which was great because that meant, first of all, for me, it had maybe 5 seconds of ego bruising. And then after that, it was like, ooh, PR, good.
Yeah.
These are people who don't like him. So that was the start. After that, I created 4 different book publishing companies. And every time I came up with a new model for a thought leader or a CEO to more effectively and efficiently write books, I would have to be a guinea pig. So I test drove a lot of the models I created.
That's fascinating. I just had somebody on the show yesterday. She does this exclusively. She helps publish books, right? She's cradle to grave. She helps you write the book from inception idea all the way to execution, and then she helps you publish it. She works primarily with financial consultants and attorneys, which was interesting.
Oh, nice.
But it was a cool conversation. I don't know if you have any interest in connecting with more people, but she was a very intriguing individual. So I'm always.
I'd love to talk to her, particularly if you found the BS meter didn't go off.
No, she was no bullshit. That's what I love.
Oh, good. Here's one of the problems today in running a publishing company. Book publishing has become democratized. And as something becomes democratized, a brand new business model starts creeping into the fold. Can I tell you what it is?
Mm-hmm.
It's stupid. And it's really hard for any professional to compete with stupid. And so for those people who know me, who like integrity, who just want, I say what I do, what I say, and they want that, those people I work with. But new people coming on the road, they'll compare me and price shop compared to other people who have just absolutely ludicrous business models. And so that's what in 2019, that's what got me thinking about what's next.
That's funny you said that about integrity. I'm trying to find my notes from her. Yeah, that's what I thought. She said in her industry, she's now some of the terms that she's been fondly referred to by is a pioneer of integrity.
Interesting. Well,
Yeah,
that's
so
very fascinating. I wonder if that means she's in a murky industry.
she works with attorneys and financial
Yeah,
advisors. So there's a little bit of murk
I,
there. I'm pretty
I'd
sure,
be very
yeah.
curious to see who she hangs out with.
Yeah, so I'll connect you. Her name is Melanie, so I'll put the two of you in touch. She was really cool. I want to talk a little bit about this idea of credibility, if you don't mind. Can you tell me a little bit about you've built your reputation and your legacy? It sounds like, from what I'm reading, at least from your website and some of the stuff that Melissa handed off to me, around this concept of credibility and personal transformation. Can you elaborate on the credibility piece?
So, how that came about is I started seeing a transformation of the industry. In 2019, I woke up one morning and I go, I've got to do something new. What is it? And I thought, I have a lot of thought leaders who have been clients that I help publish books for. What is it that they're really looking for? Looking for credibility. Great. What's the definition of credibility? And I looked it up in the dictionary and it said the quality of being trusted. I go, God, that seems really light. Let me go on a journey. And the next morning I woke up and I go, let me go on a Napoleon Hill journey. So I set the stage to interview 500 thought leaders on credibility. And I did that between 2019 and 2020. That unlocked a transformation in me by A, understanding what credibility is, and then B, understanding there's some secrets that came out of those interviews. And there was one, clarity, that really popped out as the number one secret. But let's first give you an updated definition of credibility. Credibility is not just the quality in which one is trusted. Credibility is the quality in which you're trusted, known, and liked. Let's be very specific. You said, we're going to talk about you for a second. You said you're very industry agnostic. However, you need to make sure that the client you're working with has a good spiritual feeling, a good spiritual, not necessarily practice, but that they are a good human.
Mm-hmm.
That's what comes out as you get to know somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, if you don't like them, why would you pick them up as a client? So credibility is the quality. You're someone who's credible to you as a customer. They are trusted, them, and you like them. Make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. So these 500 CEOs or these 500 thought leaders, how did you go about, did you use your existing network? Like, how do you go around querying people like this, if I can ask?
Oh, if you can, anything you can automate would make life a lot easier. Going through a process of identifying the target market you want to go after, and then setting up a structure not too dissimilar to the model you have in place. I would always do, actually, I think at the beginning I may not have been as smart, but somewhere after the 10th interview, I started doing pre-interviews for everybody just to verify that they were the right people. What ended up happening is the interviews, it was 5 questions in 5 minutes.
Mm.
And I'd book a half hour time. I typically did it Tuesday and Wednesday afternoons, and I'd interview somewhere between 10 to 14 people every Tuesday and Wednesday afternoon, back-to-back interviews, which, by the way, remind me to come back about and talk about bladder control for a second. And it was amazing. What was really powerful as I'm going through this transformation with the people I'm talking to, because what they do is they come on the air and I go, hey, do you want to practice the interviews ahead of time?
Mm.
And we would practice. And the first question I'd ask Deevo, the first question was, what is your CPOP? And CPOP was an acronym I created called Customer Point of Possibilities. And it turns out, by the way, that is the secret I learned is clarity. And I'll come back to that too. And what would happen is I would be talking to these people and we'd walk through the five questions. And as we get them aligned up, somewhere at the 15-minute mark, I'd go, yeah, I'm not sure we're going to do it. We can interview if you want, but it's not going to be the best you. Do you want to reschedule? And if you want to reschedule, we'll talk about you for the rest of the time. A lot of times it would just hit. So what I was keeping track of, Did people come prepared? Did they come early? Were they good at what they did? And then all the other elements. It was powerful. Well, I told you I put a stake in bladder control. I learned something really interesting. For some odd reason, when two people were together, they were meant to meet. If you're doing 4 hours back to back, you've got to run to the bathroom. So what would happen is I'd finish the interview. I'd let the person in the green room to come in, and I'd introduce the two and say, "Hey guys, I actually need to run to the bathroom. I'll be right back. Would you mind talking to each other?" And when they were in an animated conversation, when I got back, "Do you mind if I send you a connection request for the two of you? I'll just connect you afterwards." The person was just saying, "You got a boogie because I got to interview this other guy." And it always turned out to be a really fascinating combo of people that we connected with.
So what's your CPOP?
So at the moment, by the way, thank you. I have a bigger CPOP, which I can't sell. My fundamental CPOP, humans that want to be seen as credible. Now, the problem there is you need to define what credibility is, and it's hard to make money on that. I did that for a little bit. What I decided to do is focus on an industry to start. And the Jeffrey Moore model, crossing the chasm. And that is I picked a particular vertical, and that vertical is coaches. The second vertical is fractional execs. So my CPOP at the moment is 8 words. Coaches who've created a job, not a business. And that's exactly the right response. Oh, that's interesting, intriguing. Tell me more. The goal of articulating, typically CPOPs are somewhere between 4 to 8 words, but less than 10. The goal of a CPOP, the goal of having clarity, is that it has 2 opportunities for you. It acts as a compass for you as a individual or as a company. Because when you make decisions, you want to make decisions that are in alignment with the compass. And if you then demonstrate behavior that's in alignment with the compass, and then you've taken that information, you make it consistent online and offline, you have integrity, you have authenticity, you look like somebody that people will trust.
Sure.
So it acts as a compass. It also acts as a magnet. Because if you are very clear of who you are and who you serve, what happens is people get attracted to you and people recommend you. And so part of where I'm going now is helping those coaches who they may be phenomenal at transformation, whether at businesses or individuals. However, what they're not good at, business development, having a steady stream of clients coming in the door. So the solution I created was simply they get a coach, they get access to a mastermind, and they get leads on a weekly basis. And so we just help smooth their business. Did I want to be in coaches? Not necessarily. By the way, I love, if I decide to work with somebody, I love working with whoever it is. That has to be a decision as well. It's not where I wanted to go. So as soon as I truly have this under control, I still consider what I do beta versus live. Once it's under control, then I'll let my graduates of the program take over and run it. Because for me, clarity is what I'll say at the moment. I am one of the best or the best clarity person on the planet. I could talk to any human or any company and help them articulate where they are executing on their purpose in less than 10 words.
And how do you have a process for this, I'm assuming?
It's a simple process, not easy, but simple. Yes.
But it's a structured process that's repeatable, or is it adaptive for each client that you work with?
Yes and yes. So the structured stuff there's a structured framework. The adaptive is it needs to take into consideration it's different for a company than an individual. So I'll talk individuals. For an individual, it most of the time represents the frequency of how they vibrate. So humans, we vibrate at a frequency, and which means that if we are in good shape and we're vibrating, we are executing on our true purpose. Our true purpose is serving others. And although 90% of people can't articulate their purpose, what you heard me said is I help people articulate where they're executing on their purpose today. And so that's a different word because you can execute on your purpose without truly knowing what your purpose is. I know that's an interesting set of words to say.
So you're referring to their potential.
I don't know if it's potential. It could be that could be a nomenclature thing. I'm referring to where they get excitement and why they were put on this earth.
Hmm. It's
Most of the
interesting.
time, by the way, to be clear, most of the time it comes from in their earlier days, there was some kryptonite, something that got in their way. And as they overcame that kryptonite, that became their superpower.
Mm,
And so a lot of times their purpose is to help others achieve that transformation quicker.
mm. I want to go back to the credibility term and the definition of it because it's a bit of a nebulous term for me, at least in today's fast-paced digital world, right? Attention spans are short, information is abundant. We're constantly being slammed with the next best thing, the next business plan, the next whatever. There's always something popping out, right? New algorithm. So, how do you define credibility in this fast-paced world so that you can stay relevant? Because I'm not saying that credibility is a nebulous term in itself. I guess I'm seeing because we have so much information at our fingertips now, yesterday or today's credible expert may not be tomorrow's. So how do you define that in the sense of keeping them front and center for their audience?
You've mentioned that word. The most important thing you said of that entire question is their audience.
Mm-hmm.
What we've been taught in life is more is better, bigger is
Yeah.
better, enough is never enough.
Yeah.
Those are all incorrect concepts.
100%.
So what's important is if you understand someone's CPOP, the place in which they're playing, if you have clarity on where that person plays, now you've defined an audience. And so where they need to be relevant is in front of the audience they've defined that they want to serve today.
Mm-hmm.
That keeps things a lot more focused. Your
And
guest you
that may
had
not be,
yesterday,
and
for
that may
instance.
be just one person, right? Sorry to interrupt. I think a lot of people lose focus of the fact that if they don't have a large audience, whether it's because social media has trained us with these stupid transformative ideas of followers and fans and likes, and we have these vanity
Yeah, yeah.
metrics that we
Yeah,
appeal
throw
to,
those out. Yeah, yeah.
right? So I try to tell everybody the same thing. Who gives a fuck, man? That means literally nothing. Most of that stuff is fixed, controlled, and algorithm by somebody else outside of your control and context. Focus on just affecting one person. How can you speak to that one person right now?
That's at the end of the day, what it comes down to is
Mhm.
the relationships you have
Yeah.
with those in your audience, where the most important set of relationships that I feel are relevant are your referral partners.
Mm,
When I talk to somebody at Devo, it feels like you and I can are certainly aligned. First thing that came in my head in the first 30 seconds, referral partner.
mm,
Let's get to know each other better. Because if we have overlap and we like how we both show up, let's make sure that I refer you to the right clients and you and vice versa. And it really comes down to it's really hard when here, let's do it. Let's say something differently. Um, it's really hard not to follow the industry norms. It goes back to my first book. I ended up buying the house even though I wanted to make sure it was the right thing to do because if everyone said jump, I wasn't sure I wanted to jump until I researched. When on this concept called the CPOP, and by the way, you could stump me with anybody. I've done this over 1,000 times. And when I talk to somebody and they get their CPOP, customer pointed possibilities, they feel so good. They're in alignment. They maybe for the first time in their lives, they really know who they are and they're in frequency. Now,
mm,
here's the sad part. Without any incremental support, they will get out of alignment 90% will get out of alignment between 2 hours and 2 weeks.
mm,
Because they're going to again then talk to their network and they're going to say, oh my God, I talked to this Mitchell Levy or I talked to this guy, and this is this thing I have called a CPOP. And what will happen is the person, humans, what we'll do is we'll try to be helpful
mhm,
and they'll pick a particular word and want to change it.
mm,
And when the person goes, yeah, let me change that, by the time they come back, they're no longer articulating the words which represent their frequency. That's the part when you said before, is there's a mechanical element and then there's that that thing that isn't really mechanical. It's just listening to the person's energy, vibration. What
Yeah.
words do they echo? A little bit of NLP, neuro linguistic programming, to really listen to what's important to them.
Yeah.
And those are the words that end up going out there as part of their CPOP. And what'll happen if 90% of people naturally will forget it, even though they felt good when they had it, it means that they need incremental support, incremental service. Those are the things I'm working on now.
Yeah, that's what I meant earlier. I think you picked up on that, the spiritual pragmatism. You asked me about my process, and I said there's a spiritual pragmatic process that I take through just to understand. So I totally get that. In terms of, I was going to ask you a question. I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, in the 500 people, I wrote that down earlier. In the 500 people that you interviewed, you mentioned clarity, but you also led into this know, like, trust paradigm. Were there any other common traits? And these 500 people, are these CEOs? These are leaders? These are entrepreneurs? Tell me who these 500 were before I ask the rest of my question.
There were mostly thought leaders, a number of them being entrepreneurs, some CEOs of companies. The CEOs were typically companies less 10 million or less, and entrepreneurs. Yeah.
Did you categorize the output of the types of individuals that responded based upon a common trend?
I was about 50, I was about 50 interviews in. So I categorized everything and documented all. That I actually put in the book, Credibility Nation. I did my second TED Talk was focused on that research. 50 in, I realized that the most important category I should look at is the difference with responses between men and women.
Hmm,
And so I
interesting.
did actually break down the responses that way.
I guess where I was going with that question, and that's interesting. I didn't even think about gendered fluidity, but I was more thinking along the lines of a corporate CEO might answer that differently than an entrepreneurial CEO, or a startup entrepreneur would have a different answer than like someone who's been doing this for 20 years, like me. So I was just wondering if you saw a delineation in that
I
area.
just I had enough of each category to say that the results were statistically significant,
Hmm.
but I didn't break it down between corporate and entrepreneur.
Got it. Are there any significant barriers to establishing credibility for an entrepreneur, and what would some of those qualifiably be?
Life. Look,
Reputation.
the most important thing you can do to establish credibility is to pick up clients, say what you're going to do, what you say, integrity, and then tell other people about it. And to there's what happens is there's so many people who have marketers who have interesting marketing ideas, and they'll take one thing that worked and they'll say this will work for everybody. And as an entrepreneur, you got to figure out what works for you.
Sure.
There's no magic formulas. There's magic formulas, but you have to experiment with them before you spend a lot of money on them.
Sure.
Right? And so how do you get credibility? Over time in an industry where people know you, they respect you. That's credibility.
Hmm.
Credibility is the quality. They trust, know, and like you.
Sure.
And it's important to do all. Now, if you're in an industry and you're a dick, if you're the only one there, as long as they trust and know you, they're going to buy from you. But if somebody else comes along and they trust them, but not as much, but they don't know them as much, but you might lose your business.
So if you're a dick, but you still are credible, you can be successful. But if all things being equal, somebody comes along that is also credible, but not a dick, the not a dick is always going to win out.
It's surprising how likability can compensate for some lack of trust and some lack of knowing somebody.
I want to move off the credibility in a second, but one last question in that space that came to mind as you were talking. So I do have a lot of early entrepreneurs that I work with, especially just launching a new business. So they may or may not have the experiential credibility. So, what's one thing that an early entrepreneur, an early CEO can do to really start harnessing the power of tapping into building a reputation around their credibility?
Are we talking service-based entrepreneur or product-based entrepreneur?
Both could be from, unless there's a difference, significant difference to you.
Oh, huge difference in terms of tactics.
Okay.
Um,
Let's just say non-product based, just somebody who has a service they offer.
yeah, let's focus on services easier.
Like a
So
coach. Let's just use a coach for example. Since
coaches are great. So I've got a format I love using for coaches. What I'll say to them is 3 for 3. what I recommend is, so let's say you're starting out, you're relatively new, or you've been in business for a while, but you're doing something different. Remember 3-4-3. So what you want to do is get 3 clients, and what you will do is charge them $1 a month for 3 months. And what you say to them is, listen, this is not my normal rate. The real cost. So you want to have a dollar transaction. You actually want to do that because when you pay money, that means something different. But the real cost is somewhere towards the end of 3 months, I'd like you to give me a video testimonial. And then we'll talk about whether or not you want to continue at my regular rates. The second thing that happens is somewhere between month 1 and 2, I'd like you to recommend 3 other people. So imagine after a couple months period of time, you have had you've found 3, so you have 3 clients, you're going to get 3 video testimonials, and you may get 9 other referrals because like-minded people hang out together. And you could offer the same dollar program, or for the new people coming in, you could offer your regular rates. But what you need to do is get out there, get busy, make it not theory, make it practice, and deliver value to those people you're working with so they want to talk about you. And if you capture what they want to talk about in video testimonial format, that's information you put on your website, and that leads towards the trust, know, and like factor as they go to your website and they see that.
That's really cool. I like that. I might steal that from you.
Please do. Every now and then you want to spread my cred dust and use my name, but feel free to use it.
So you've got a pretty comprehensive background from .coms to multiple companies that you've founded. How did this idea of credibility come into play for you?
It really was every time we have a transition point. My first transition point was I left corporate in 1997.
What were you doing in corporate?
I was working for Sun Microsystems. I was running the e-commerce component of Sun supply chain. And I'm like, it's the .com days. I need to be a consultant doing my own thing. Really successful there until the .bomb. So for those that remember, the .bomb was the point in time where everyone didn't e-commerce, didn't think the internet was going to be successful, and Amazon was going to go out of business.
Yeah.
So my business went to zero. That part of my business went to zero overnight. That was a transition point. I knew I started my book publishing companies in 2005. I knew at some point in time they'd be democratized. By the time 2019 came along, I'm like, yeah, it's about that time. What's next? And so it's how do you go about figuring out what your purpose is? What do you want to add value? And I just figured since I was engaging with thought leaders, that's probably the audience I need to work with. What type of thought leaders? And what is it that is important to them? And since credibility was important to them, that's when I thought about, literally it popped in my head. One day, thought leaders, next day, credibility, Napoleon Hill journey.
You've referenced Napoleon Hill a few times now in this conversation. Was this sort of an early mentor in terms of the book for you, or is this just something like it's a Bible for you?
Oh, the most entrepreneurs will quote from Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill's book, right? It's a powerful book with valuable resources. And he was commissioned by Carnegie to interview 500 millionaires. And so it turns out to be a very interesting process. It's like anything else in life. If you do something enough over and over again, it becomes something that you start feeling really comfortable when you get insights. So I wanted to be able to speak how I speak now. I didn't even realize the fundamental truth of what I wasn't thinking I was going to lead towards helping people articulate where they're executing on their purpose. That's not what I expected when I started doing the interviews. I'm happy that I'm here now, but now I need to take that into those people taking that and making money with it, which is why I've executed in the way I have.
In all the people that you've coached or led or the companies that you've interacted with, have you seen a common thread in the people themselves?
I think I clearly understand the question. Why don't you add to that question so I can make sure I answer it in the way you were thinking about? Because there's so many.
I work with a lot of CEOs. I have this podcast where I get the opportunity to interview just some amazing people. It's one of the reasons I do the podcast. Is expanding my network and my circle of influence and the type of thought leadership that I'm exposed to on literally a daily basis. And I think I have 4 podcasts today, by the way. And every
Nice.
single time I have one of these shows, I'm blown away by the amount of information that they and knowledge that they have, the amount of humanity that most of them possess, the amount of motivation and drive. But there's so many other qualities that I have started to see a pattern developing and all of my clients or all of my guests are entrepreneurs. And so I'm wondering in the hundreds of clients that you've coached or interacted with, or the diverse companies that you've had the pleasure of working with, is there a common thread in the type of people that you're seeing that rises to the top, if you will?
Oh, interesting. So if you end up watching the TED Talk is called We're Losing Our Humanity, and I'm tired of watching it happen. That's when I explain the 10 values of credibility. And I'd say under being trustworthy, there are 4 values there. And I think of the 4 values, coachability is probably the one that's most relevant. As I get to know somebody of the 4 values there, being a servant leader is most relevant. And under likability, I think the value of respect. So people who are servant leaders who are coachable, i.e., always learning and have respect for other humans, that's the type of people I like to work with.
Can somebody be non-coachable but still be successful in their entrepreneurial world?
No. So I'll tell you a story. You could, and people are, but great question. So I had 9 values identified of credibility. I ended up having a guy who was a $35,000 a speaking slot speaker come on. Almost by definition, too smart to actually watch the 16-minute video ahead of time. So my first question is said, hey, would you mind sharing what's your CPOP? We were in the green room practicing. He gave me a 30-second response, that his memorized 30-second elevator pitch. And then I said, most people just say who they work with, 1, 2, or 3 words, and the pain point or pleasure point they have. He narrowed it down to 15 seconds. And then I said something that really blew me away. Actually, he said something that blew me away based on what I said was, hey, do you mind if I do a little bit of coaching? So before I would actually
Sure.
coach with anyone, I'd ask that question. His response was, yes, I do. I have my way of doing things and you have yours, and I don't want to learn yours.
Wow.
Now, the word that was coming to the top of my lips were the one you used that earlier as an F word. And I'm like, but I was unusually quiet for about 2, 3 seconds. And then he says, you know what, this is not going to work out between us. I said, yes, it is. Good luck with everything you do. Now, let me step back for a second. This is someone who's not coachable. I sat on the board of a public company. I actually was the chairman for a little bit. The CEO would, whenever they would hire somebody from their staff, they'd often have 1 or 2 board members interview. So imagine somebody was going to be a C-suite leader at a public company and a board member is interviewing, and the board member picks up that they don't want to be taught by the CEO. They don't want to learn from their underlings. They don't care about what their customers have to say. I would never say yes to somebody like that. To go through life curious is one of the most powerful things we can do, to constantly be in an opportunity to learn, in essence, to be coachable. That's probably of all 10 values. I don't know. I still like servant leadership, but to be coachable is really important.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I had 15 years of experience in the corporate world before I jumped ship and went into entrepreneurialism. And in those 15 years, I believe we had six or seven CEO changes in that organization. And this was a Fortune 50 company that had multiple divisions. So I'm talking about some of the smaller divisions that were eventually bought out by the master company. But in the company that I worked for in San Diego, there were 6 different CEOs. And I'm one of those people that just like to watch. I like to watch people and just watch and learn. You can learn so much from, I used to sit in the cafeteria in college and just watch people, and just pick up on all the subtleties and the nuances of people's and their personalities. Anyway, but one of the things I did a little study on my own, just watching these six different CEOs. And then when I left the corporate world, I did this exercise just trying to figure out what kind of CEO I would become. But I noticed in every CEO, there were basically two common strategies. There was the CEO that inherited this position and felt that it was bestowed upon them, that they were owed, that this was their legacy, and everybody else was beholden to them. There was that CEO. And then there was the CEO that felt like they had they had earned it, definitely earned it, but the only way they were going to lead was to be in the trenches with their team type of CEO. Does that make sense? So those two
Oh,
different.
absolutely. Yeah.
So there's the glorified CEO that's like the diva, if you will, and then there's the CEO that's I'm going to roll up my sleeves and we're going to build this company together. And I'm here to build my company. I'm not here to sit on the board and not be bothered by things. And I always marveled at those two different strategies, because what would happen in a very short amount of time is the two CEOs report people that reported to them would also sort of adopt the style of their leader. And so it became this top down or bottom. I think that's where the two terms probably came from. I don't know if anyone's really done this study, but this is just my little study. They became a top down or a bottom up sort of philosophy in the business in a very short amount of time. And I just remember thinking, if I'm ever going to run a company or if I'm ever going to be a CEO, that I would never be the top down. I would always be the bottom up, where I'm in with the people. I want to be part of the process. I want to see what's going on. I want to be in touch with everything, all those different pieces. But most importantly, I want to build the people in the company. That's what I always would do as a CEO. Is like, how do you build your people so that ripple effect, same one that I was just describing, also gets imbued across the corporation, right? And I'm just curious if you have an opinion on that. And it wasn't really a question; it was more of just an analysis. But do you have an opinion about that space?
Oh, you were sharing. And by the way, there's probably more than two types of CEOs that come in a role. But if we're going to just do the bifurcation of good and bad, I'm in agreement with you. The best thing any CEO can do, and this is an entrepreneur, you have one person working for you. The best thing you can do is to work with that person to make them the best person they can be. Period.
I
Right.
agree.
So with CEOs, the role is, how do you power the executive team? And a lot of my clients are at the CEO level or part of the executive staff. For me, in addition to what I'm doing with the clarity work, I also am part of Marshall Goldsmith's 100 coaches. So
Okay.
it's some of the top executive coaches on the planet. I typically have, it's always less than 12 executive coaching clients, but it's typically CEOs of companies between 5 and 100 million, because
Okay.
that's the last time the CEO itself can really impact culture. How do you impact culture? It's exactly what you just mentioned. It's the opportunity to really power the people who are touching the customers to be the most effective with their customers, because that's how you get the reputation. That's how you get credibility. That's how you get people talking about you.
Mm-hmm. There was a book that came out when I was in the corporate world, and this was in the 90s and early 2000s. It was How to Build Raving Fans. Do you remember this book?
I do remember that. Who was
It
the
was a
author of that?
it was a
Remember?
tiny little pamphlet, and I remember my CEO, one of the first CEOs, um, had handed the book out to everybody to read it. And I just remember thinking, chapter one says, don't be the diva CEO. It's if you're going to affect your customers, you first have to affect your people. And I just remember, like, you sat up in your ivory tower and just like you never associated with anybody. And this is a true story, man. You're going to love this because I think you and I are in the same energy. I had a question to ask this guy, and he was up on the fourth floor of the building, and I don't remember what it was. I was doing a project and somebody casually mentioned we should ask such and get his opinion. So I was like, I'm just going to go up there and ask their opinion. So I did. And man, you would have thought that I was invading the White House. And I got rep.
Seriously.
Yeah, man, I was early in my career and I had just whatever. But you would have thought that I was invading the White House, and I was reprimanded by my manager. And I had this reputation for being like, and I just remember thinking, dude, I had a really good idea, which by the way, you later implemented. You didn't give me credit for, but you later implemented this thing. And I just remember thinking, what? I will never be that person that's not approachable. And I just remember thinking that was put me on the that was put me on the windtail of I don't know that I could stay in this type of an environment for the rest of my life doing this sort of work. And so that's where the whole idea of entrepreneurialism started to like ferment in my head. So
I
anyhow,
I
sorry, go
was
ahead.
going to say I went to Gemini, and Ken Blanchard was the one who had written that book.
Raving fans.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And
It's
I'm
a good
like, oh
little
yeah, that
book. I
makes
liked
sense.
it.
That makes
Yeah.
for sense for him. Yeah, it's really interesting when you look at corporations and you go, this seems very obvious. It's just the guys who are in place today are deploying an approach that seems more like the old army military command and control,
Mm,
right? And if you did a bottoms up empowered organization, now still the leader, there's ultimately somebody who needs to make decisions,
hmm.
right? And that needs to be pushed down as much as possible. But if you can empower people and give them, allow them to be engaged at work, to love what they do, to they're there because they're there to serve the purpose that the company wants to serve.
Hmm.
And if you could have that level of alignment, I have not deployed yet at a mass scale, but I did do an article in CEO magazine of how to deploy that level of clarity in the CPOP through an organization and how that works. And I believe I'm doing a PhD at the moment, so I will test drive different aspects of this. But I believe we will significantly increase employee engagement when the employees have a purpose in terms of who they are and what they do, and are empowered to deliver on that purpose.
And alignment in their purpose with the company's goals or individual purpose with their individual units.
Yes, and yes.
Hmm.
And the only downside is once the company figures out what their CPOP is, there may be employees whose their personal CPOPs are not in alignment.
Hmm.
It's time for them to move on.
Yeah, I was just going to actually ask you about that. What's that fine line between retention and developing employees to the point where they become so talented or so purpose driven or whatever it is that they might realize this is not in alignment with what I actually thought, or they become so talented that they're a valuable commodity and can write their own ticket somewhere else.
I the big issue, and we did this in the US, we had slaves at some point in time. Company is not the slave owner of their employees.
Hmm.
That's probably the best way to look at it. If you have people working with you, they should be there not just because you pay them, but they like being there. Now, that's not true today for most companies. All right. And what happens in Silicon Valley, we handcuff employees by giving them stock options. And as the stocks increase, they decide to stay because money is a motivator. But today's generation, the younger generation, money is not as big of a motivator.
Mm.
So if money is not as big of a, when you and I were growing up, money was the motivator. But if money is not the motivator, how do you allow people to stay? You help grow them.
Yeah.
You help them become better humans, and you help, in many cases, you help them see that what the company is doing is in alignment with what they want to do and how they want to serve humanity.
Hmm.
There's, in some cases, very minor, but it's going to be fundamental transformation of what happens at companies to be able to empower the employee base. Listen, if you have an employee that's not a good fit and they're there and you're happy they're there, you should not be afraid if they're not a good fit to find out they're not a good fit and allow them to easily transition to something else. Because
Well,
deep down, they're causing problems.
yeah, and becomes a systemic issue. So I always thought, and this may exist. I only had one corporate experience, and I did that for 15 years, and I left. So this may exist in other cultures. I'm not saying that it does or doesn't, but I always thought within the culture of my business, there were people that were not a good fit for the role that they were put in or the role that they had evolved into. But there was never any shuffling and analysis of the from the human resource side to take a look at is Deevo in the right role? Is Mitchell doing the right things for this right division? And if not, have we done a good enough job to profile both the positions that we have in our company and the people that are filling those positions and reorganize a bit so that we can get that person in the right capacity, not only for them, but also for the company? And that never happened. There was just this linear line where people would basically just get stuck in this department and go up or lateral. And I just remember thinking, Frank is not should never be in accounting. The dude literally has zero arithmetic skills whatsoever. But you know what he's really good at? He's really good at human resources or things of that nature, right? And that may exist. I just didn't see that in my business, and I was baffled at it. So it's, I guess, just agreeing with your point.
Yeah, one of the things I particularly like are some of the larger companies when they have intern programs coming in, they'll rotate them across a number of departments so that
Mm.
people could see what they like. That's probably the best they have at the moment. But can you imagine sitting at a boardroom? I can't. Or even sitting at the executive suite and having sales and marketing look at each other. I think I'm not as good of a salesperson as I am a marketer. You want to switch jobs with me? Can you imagine something like that happening? No. But it's interesting because if they played better together versus compete, there's such a fine line between what a salesperson does and what a marketing person does, or any, if you do it right, the synergies and opportunity to power your peers. We're just not taught to do that. We're
That's where I
taught to
was.
take the limelight,
Yeah,
right?
that's where I was going to go with that. If there was a way to build a collaborative capacity where they did have to switch roles, but they had to support each other in that capacity when they did switch the roles. So you had a mentor and a mentee, but then you would verse it the next month and they would, the mentor and the mentee would also switch. I don't know. There's just this, we're going off topic, but let's get back to entrepreneurs because that's my true passion. One of the things I've been seeing really happen over the last, I would say the last 18 months has really become front and center is this whole idea around thought leadership. And it feeds my database of people because a lot of the people that I'm now taking on as clients are looking to develop their thought leadership capacity, whether it's writing books, whether it's building a personal brand, whether it's something in that space. But this whole idea around thought leadership is starting to become like this cliche buzzword. And you've been ranked in your career, you've been named one of the top leadership voices in the world in a bunch of different categories, which, by the way, congratulations. And thank you for stooping down to my low level to speak to me. But
All
how do
right.
you, how,
Definitely not. Just I'm listening to you. I am not stooping to any level whatsoever. Thank you for having
thank you. But as a thought leadership, and you are truly a thought leader in that world, how do you define what thought leadership is in today's marketplace? And
Oh,
what
it's
are some of the
crazy.
what are some of the ways to establish credibility as a thought leader?
So we've said it. So this is a great question because I'm going to reframe it in a way that it's going to stick, hopefully. For a long time, by the way, just like book publishing has become democratized,
Mm,
thought leadership has become democratized.
100%.
And that happened in 2023 when AI came to the plate.
Mm,
We used to be able to take a look at the quality of people's blog writing or the
mm,
quality of the books they wrote. But now with AI, anyone could do anything in
mm,
somebody else's voice. So I want to give a different definition of thought leadership. And just think of a thought leader as having an audience from one to many that people want to listen to their thoughts. Right now, we are both acting as thought leaders to each other. If I act on one of your ideas, or if you act on one of my ideas, I'm a thought leader. If you take the 3 for 3 coaching model and act on it, guess what? I'm a thought leader. So if I'm thinking about it from your perspective, someone who helps coaches, entrepreneurs be able to tell a good story that helps them establish thought leadership, the story has to center around focusing on an audience that they could put their arms around, right? The woman you had yesterday was specifically focused on financial services and attorneys.
yeah.
That's an audience. Even narrowing that further might even be more relevant. So thought leadership is having a audience that listens to who you are. That audience does not need to be huge. Try to ignore, unless you have so much money you don't have to worry about it. Try to ignore the massive people who are out there shaping your markets. Try to ignore the bigger influencers because that's not, influencer and thought leader are two different things.
Definitely.
So, as a thought leader, you want your target audience to know that you have thoughts that they want to listen to. Simple.
Hmm. The whole idea of influencers always turned me off. I never understood the whole fanaticism around this idea of somebody just sitting behind a social media camera, just talking about the things that they talked about. I never really understood it because I never really found much value in it. But anyway, that's just a personal, subjective opinion. So I want to keep driving down that point. So in if you had to rename it, because it's now become democratized, what would you call it? But what makes a thought leader? Obviously credibility, but what is it that people are looking for? If I choose to follow Tony Robbins, or if I choose to follow Mitchell Levy, or if I choose to follow George Herbert, or anybody else that I'm out there, James Nestor, or anybody else that I find to be of value to me. James Clear wrote he has a really cool newsletter, 123 or something, whatever, Atomic Habits. What are the variables of these types of people that are magnetic, that are sticky when you think about that?
Yeah. By the way, my last name is Levy.
Oh,
Just
I'm
thought
saying it wrong. Sorry.
oh, that's all right. You said, of course, they need to be credible, but I want to incorporate so to be a thought leader, you need to be trusted. You need to be known. If people don't know you, not just know of you, but they need to actually know you. And truthfully, I think they need to like you. Although we've seen thought leaders that have been hated,
Mm.
not talking about any presidential candidate or anything like that. So you can be a hated thought leader. So that's not the only thing. I think what thought leaders do better than others, why somebody might remember one person versus another, like a Ken Blanchard, you're quoting his book, right? Is because they've simplified the complex, right? What makes a good thought leader? It's somebody you want to listen to because in the limited time you have available for some ongoing learning, you know that this person has ideas, thoughts, actions that you might want to emulate. That's really in the business world, that's really what a thought leader is good at and
Mm.
powerful at.
You reference politics. I don't want to go into the political world, but I do have a question about that because never before have I been more intrigued by the marketing, the PR, the disinformation, the proliferation of two people that, from my perspective, I would vote them off my island in 4 seconds. That are now running for president of the most powerful country in the world. How in God's name did two people that are running for president, this is a subjective opinion, call it what you will, I've yet to see anything come out of either one of those camps that would ever make me want to follow you into battle, just to use a metaphor. How did those two people become thought leaders and potentially running the most powerful country on the planet? How is that possible? What have they
Yeah,
done?
you know
What's
what
their recipe?
I'm going to use an escape valve that Marshall Goldsmith uses often. Marshall being the number one CEO coach in the world. Although I do have a personal opinion, I'm going to say I'm not an expert here on that particular area. And I will say that we are at a catastrophic rate in the existence of this country, this experiment called United
I
States.
agree. We're at a crossroads for sure.
And we are at this massive crossroads. And I believe it's in everyone's best interest to make a decision. Because the,
I would make a decision for what though? It's
the,
bad or worse. Which one do you
I
decide
think the
on?
decision at this stage is between fascism and capitalism, or fascism and being an open community in terms of who we are. But anyhow, that's the
All right, we'll move off because
yeah.
it can be a
That's a
heated, and I don't have an
we could
you,
fall into
you need to phone a friend for this response. I don't have alliances with either one, just so we're clear. I just sometimes I hear the rhetoric and I'm like, how in the hell are these the two smartest people on the planet? Anyhow, the challenge of personal growth is something that's really near and dear to me. And I've been on a mission personally for about 13 years on trying to reshape what I bring to the table. It's just been my personal mission for the last easily 13 years. And basically, it started when I got divorced. And I talk about this before. This is not an original concept, but I always love to hear what other thought leaders have to say about this. And you've helped 1,000 people articulate their purpose in 10 words or less, your CPOP. But if somebody is blissfully unaware of their trajectory, first question, Do you feel compelled that you have to interject to change that trajectory because you want to just call them out as their friend, as their coach, as their partner, whatever it may be? Or do you let the message arrive when the student is ready? That's the first question. And then the second question is, if somebody realizes that they're on a journey of personal growth, are there some rudimentary things that they should be doing first and foremost to help matriculate that process?
So on the first question, you can't teach something to someone who's not ready to learn.
Mm.
And unfortunately, many of us have made that mistake many times. But you can't coach somebody who's not coachable. And they can be not coachable for a number of different reasons. They're at the beginning of the journey, they're not ready. They're at the end of the journey, they don't think they need it.
Mm.
I'd say in your second question, fundamentally, and this is what I'll help prove or disprove as part of my dissertation that I'm working on for the PhD. I believe the best thing you could do right now is determine where you're executing on your purpose. When you wake up every morning, what are you doing? Deevo, I'll give you the formula for the CPOP, right? Happy to give that away. And it comes down to, at the end of the day, it's two aspects. First, who do you serve? And so in 1, 2, or 3 words, what is the audience you serve? And the second piece of it is from their perspective, not yours, from their perspective, what is the pain point or pleasure point they want to resolve? If you can articulate how you show up every day in less than 10 words, that is, and then you start looking at yourself, okay, as a compass, how am I changing my website? How am I changing my social media? What social media should I be on based on my CPOP? As a compass, it'll help you each and every day. If you do the 3 for 3, who should I go after? That's what the CPOP does. It also allows you to magnetize you. So I think that's that fundamentally what I found is somebody actually knowing where they're executing on their purpose is the best thing they could do starting off.
Is that the problem that you solve for people? Helping them define the problem that they solve?
That is the, hopefully they have, it depends. So the answer is yes, and a lot of times they're close, or a lot of times because the world has come in, it is so wide, I just help people narrow it and focus on what they really love doing.
Mm.
And so that's where the combination of what you and I do is I help them identify their CPOP and tell me more. Right? Tell me more is the minute description of what their CPOP is. What you do is help tell stories around it and tell a brand around it.
Mhm.
A cool combo.
It is a cool combo. I have one of the primary pieces that I focus on early on in the process is defining what you just said. What problem do you solve? And in fact, one of the things I do with my clients is I bring this small pebble to the first meeting and I have them write down at the end of the exercise what problem they solve. So they are constantly reminded and they carry it around in their pockets. What problem do I solve for my client, for my ideal client? Because at the end of the day, that's all we're trying to do is we're trying to you serve first, but solve a problem for somebody. That's what makes us retentive. I really love that you said that. In terms of defining your purpose, and I know we're coming near the end of the hour, so I hope you have a few more minutes. In terms of defining purpose, I think through a process, and you have a constructive process, and I have a constructive process, it's easier to define what that looks like. But what I have found early on, until my clients really start gaining some more clarity and some more confidence around it, is they have this whole idea of like, why would anybody listen to me? And has a bunch of names, imposter syndrome, all those different things. But it's a real thing, and it's a real thing with people who are celebrated, who are seasoned, who are experts in their industry. But for whatever reason, when it comes time to actually having to physically go out into the atmosphere and dispense information, they can do it just fine having a conversation with you and me or sitting at the bar or with their friends at the water cooler. But when it comes time to actually sit down and put this stuff on paper in a consistent algorithmic capacity and then sharing that with a large audience, people get really gun shy. And I'm just curious, when your experience, how have you helped people overcome that sort of thing?
Uh, Deevo, it's really simple. One of the things I might recommend, I do once a month, I do a clarity session. It's 90 minutes long, and I guarantee everyone gets their CPOP. If what happens, remember I said that 90% of people are going to forget it. So what happens next, imagine if you sent your clients to that session, they come back with their CPOP, and then you act as their clarity guide to allow them to tell stories and show up
Hmm.
in the playground that they've created for themselves.
Mm.
That's it. There's a whole lot of confidence as you're helping to solve your clients' problems or help your clients reach the issues or reach the areas they want to reach. There's a whole lot of confidence if you're recognizing that on an ongoing basis and you're getting the video testimonials and you're delivering and you're getting that satisfaction day in and day out. You just have to be executing on it. And what you have to do is ignore all the outside influences that say, hey, listen, you work on this audience, but why do you go here or there? If you're on the radio, I just swap my hands left, right,
I
and so
see.
on.
That's fun.
Right. So the thing that's interesting is stay focused, stay powered to empower those you work with and allow people to see you. They have to trust you, they have to know you. It's important they like you. And you now need to if you're now, when you say people, it doesn't have to be the world. If your audience is 100 people, figure out how you could allow 100 people to see you.
100%. Which goes back to that thing we said at the beginning. Just affect one person. Focus on one person right now. Don't worry about anything else. And just imagine that your audience is one person. Have a one-to-one conversation with people. Somebody asked me a question the other day about legacy, and I thought it was a pretty cool question. So I'm going to just replay it to you. They wanted to know, when it's all said and done, what am I leaving? What's my gift? What's my legacy? And there's a lot of different ways to interpret that. And I heard somebody respond. I don't know where we were, but I heard somebody say that it seemed a bit vain to have a legacy. And I was like, then why are you here if you're not imparting something? What's the point? What's the point if all we're here is just to be here and then move on and no one's ever going to learn or gain or grow from our involvement on this planet? What's the point? So, what is your legacy? Like when you're no longer here, what do you want people to have remembered, have learned, have gained, have grown, have evolved from their interactions with you?
Let me reframe that question a teeny bit because I haven't updated. One of the books I did was on legacy. I'm going to redefine legacy for you and everyone. Legacy is what people think about you when you're not in the room.
Yeah,
Not necessarily what people think about you when you're not on the earth. That's also
100%.
part of legacy. But what do people
100%.
think about you when they're not in the room?
Hmm.
So for me, what I want them to think about, I've made one aspect of their life easier,
Mm.
whatever that might be. I've allowed them to understand what this concepts of thought leadership, credibility, and particularly how they can get clarity and how that can simplify everything they do moving forward. But that's really the thing for me is what do I want people thinking about? Mitchell was a servant leader and he added value to my life.
Hmm.
That sounds good to me.
I think about mine, and I have a couple of different versions if I can share them for a minute. Mine is that I solved a problem for you at some point. I don't know why. I'm always like, just every time I hear or see something, I just want to figure out a way to do that a little bit better, a little bit more efficient, a little bit more effectively. But I also want people to know, and my wife gets really mad at me because I give way too many fucks about a lot of things. I give a fuck about a lot of things, and I care about a lot of things. And I care about you, and I care about your success, and I care about how you're showing up because I believe in the whole idea of community and the whole idea of collaboration. I don't believe in competition in the sense, and this is funny and ironic because I played sports my entire life, all the way through college. I played football, like always competing against somebody. But when I stepped back and looked at that whole idea of competition, and I realized how it basically pervades our entire ethos. And then I started traveling the world and I realized that other countries aren't as competitive as Americanism is. And I realized that there's a different way of doing things. And so that's my legacy. I want people to realize that you don't have to compete all the time, that sometimes you can grow in a community capacity and that you should be looking for ways to do that, connect, collaborate, and create in every capacity.
that. Well, actually, given that, I'll go back to my bigger CPOP, humans that want to be seen as credible. If I can allow more people to understand what that means so they could really be themselves and show up. But yeah, it's nice that you've been able to solve problems and be able to allow people to be better. That's a good thing. I think we want to we decide as humans we want to hang out with other people who we can learn from and grow
Mhm.
with.
You mentioned, thank you for reminding me, because you mentioned something earlier about a mastermind session or a mastermind group that you put together. I've formed my own mastermind group over here, but one of the things I've noticed is it's becoming stagnant in the sense that we're all just showing up as a routine now. So I'm trying to figure out ways to shake that up a little bit, bring in new blood, all the different things. Do you have any insights on that?
By the way, we got to get to the wrap up because I have my next running it to my next
All right,
backup.
let's cut that question. We'll do it at a breakout call.
I would love that, but I'll think about that. We'll do that next time.
All right. Mitchell, thank you. This has been a really enlightening conversation. I appreciate you taking the time and the energy and just sharing with us your journey and all the things that you're doing. So I appreciate you jumping on the show with us today.
Oh, absolutely, my pleasure. Oh, Mastermind. You want to break it, shake it up, invite somebody in who has a problem and have the mastermind help solve it.
Mhm.
So bring in new blood. Just, hey guys, we're going to do something different today. We're not going to talk about you. We're going to talk about this person and we're going to help solve their, see how that works.
Fair enough. All right, then. Thank you for joining the show, my friend.
Thank you.
I'll drop you a note and we'll get connected afterwards.
I look forward to it. All
See
right.
ya.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye bye.
All right, then. Thank you. That was a profound conversation, as are most of the guests that I have on the show. So thank you, Mitchell, for sharing your insights and your wisdom from the importance of credibility and leadership to corporate leadership styles and all the different things that you've done across your extensive career. If you want to dive deeper into credibility and personal growth with Mitchell, be sure to check him out. He has books, 500 of them, courses, TEDx talks. You can find him at mitchelllevy.com. That's Mitchell spelled with two L's, one L, two L's, three L's. Mitchell with two L's, Levy, Levy.com. It will also be in the show notes again. Mitchell, thank you again for joining us on the Branding Laboratory. I really appreciate you taking the time and the energy to share your wit and wisdom with us. Be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and follow us on social media, Deevo, the brand storyteller. If you're ready to elevate your personal brand and credibility, you can also head over to thebrandstoryteller.com to learn more about what we do for personal brand development and business alignment and helping you get your message, the right message out to the right people. I'm Deevo, and this has been a wonderful episode of the Branding Laboratory. Stay tuned. We'll be back next week. Thanks for tuning in to the Branding Laboratory. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Connect with us on social media for more branding tips and insights. And remember, your story matters. Until next time, keep building and sharing your unique brand story. I'll see you soon.